You're listening to Cloud9, where BahaiTeachings.org interviews artists from around the globe to learn about what inspires, uplifts, and motivates them to make a positive contribution to the world. My name is Shadi Talui Wallace. Before the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was signed by U.S. Congress in 1978, the indigenous peoples of America were prohibited by law to practice basic civil liberties. Liberties that included the right of freedom to believe, express and exercise ancient indigenous traditions, spiritual beliefs, and cultural practices. It was the early 70s, and Kevin Locke was in his early 20s when he began to learn of his own Lakota Anishinaabe practices, but was forced to observe them in secret. Kevin was on a spiritual quest, fasting and praying in search of the Red Road, the path to God. At the time, Kevin was living on a reservation near Standing Rock, North Dakota, while on a secret spiritual quest when he first learned of the Baha'i faith. Today, Kevin has found a unique way of sharing his traditional and spiritual beliefs on the world stage. His work as a traditional hoop dancer, indigenous flute player, storyteller, recording artist, and educator is rooted in his traditional Lakota practices and spiritual beliefs as a member of the Baha'i faith. Kevin has devoted his life honoring his mother, Patricia Locke, and her legacy to empower Native communities and sharing the teachings of oneness and unity to audiences all over the world. Kevin continues to visit schools on and off the reserve in the hopes of keeping his indigenous teachings and traditions alive in future generations. A book of his memoirs was just released by the Baha'i Publishing Trust called Arising and is available online for purchase. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on Cloud9.
Oh, it's good to be on Cloud9. Thank you.
So you've lived on the reservation for most of your life. And for those of our listeners who don't know what it means to live on a reservation, could you paint us a picture and perhaps some historical context on why reservations were first formed?
Some people ask, well, what did the people call America or United States before, white people or immigrants arrived? Well, we called it ours, O-U-R-S. So basically, there was this whole continent at one time was inhabited by indigenous people, but then immigrant populations came and, of course, decided that they wanted to take those lands. So there was the indigenous people eventually began to enter into treaty relationship with the United States government, and then certain lands were set aside, or as they say, reserved in exchange for, the vast majority of lands. And so in English language, and then those reserved lands became known as reservations. In the United States and in Canada, of course, it's called reserves.
So you live on Standing Rock at the moment?
Yes, yeah, I've got a home here, and it's I live in Wakapala, which is one of the 8 districts or communities on Standing Rock.
And what does your life on Standing Rock look like today?
Oh, today, well, it's just kind of a cloudy day here.
Did you just walk outside?
Well, I spend a lot of time outside. Yeah, I like it. It's really nice. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Right on the confluence of the Missouri River and the Grand River, and it's really scenic. It's really a beautiful location. I feel very blessed to have a place here.
Has it changed much over the years? Because you've been there for such a long time. You've probably seen it transition.
Yeah, there has been a lot of changes. Interestingly, I think a lot of people are aware of this trend for the, like rural populations to transition and become more urbanized.
Interesting. So I know that Baha'u'llah once remarked that the country is the world of the soul and the city is the world of bodies. I'd be curious to learn about how Standing Rock has impacted your own soul.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it from that particular perspective. Yeah. But, Yeah. Well, in the writings of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah creates this sublime vision of paradise and of reality. But of course, the way it's done is that by invoking elements from the phenomenal world, from the contingent world. And this is based on the principle everything in the world is a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. In other words, so that the physical world is not separate from spiritual worlds, but it's just that everything in this physical world is a counterpart to something in the spiritual world. So in other words, all the worlds of God are one. So the same principles and underlying principles are operative throughout the worlds, and so that if a person wants to really understand maybe a spiritual mystery, then they'll examine its counterpart in the physical world. So in other words, I think this is the point that was lost on many immigrant populations who first came to North America, and they observed indigenous people, and then they thought, well, these people, they're savage or they're pagan because they said, well, they're worshiping that mountain or maybe that eagle or maybe that tree or whatever it is. But it's not that at all. It's simply that, the mountain is just emblematic or symbolic of a spiritual reality, maybe majesty, let's just say. Or maybe that eagle is representational of a spiritual principle. Let's say nobility. Let's say the nobility of the human spirit or the ascendant nature of the human spirit.
What's interesting is today you're able to freely share your spiritual beliefs so openly. We'll expand more on this later on, but this wasn't always the case. And I understand that your spiritual journey began in a time where you were banned from observing your indigenous beliefs and spiritual practices. So could you just paint a picture and share what these political and social conditions look like in your 20s, those restrictions that were placed on you?
Well, this is something that was, like the indigenous devotional practices were strictly outlawed and banned, not just in the U.S., but in Canada as well. And so they were also enforced. One time I was up in Manitoba, and they had a what they call a rain dance over there, and so then I asked them, well, how did you get this word rain dance? I thought it was supposed to be a sun dance. And so my friend said, well, they did, I guess they would have called it a sun dance, but in Canada, the government banned the sun dance. So then they just continued doing it. But then when the Mounties or RCMP or whoever it was came to enforce that ban, then whoever they were talking to, they said, well, no. So the Mounties came, well, I understand you're having a sun dance here. And then the person said, no, this is a rain dance. It's a rain dance. The Mountie looked and said, well, it's drought. We need the rain. Okay, carry on. So anyway, it was just something that was outlawed across the board. And then it was, I think what happened over time was that people began to adopt what you might call, I guess nowadays, they say like a colonized mindset. And so they began to empathize or somehow adopt some of the thought patterns of the colonizers or the immigrant population. And so I think this continued, and it's still very prevalent today, but it just resulted in not just the immigrant population, but even internally, people of indigenous heritage, just accepting the fact that all of these things are not right and or many of them are not right and need to be need to be forsaken or given up. So that was kind of, just to get back to your question, that I think that was kind of like the prevailing mindset when I first took an interest in the indigenous spiritual heritage of this area.
Right. So you kind of just touched on it, but could you share what your own spiritual journey looked like under these types of conditions?
I had this real overarching goal or ambition of trying to find reality, find some kind of a spiritual reality. And so that when I would ask people like in the community here about that, about what the spirituality or this quest might be like, then the response that I got was that, you can't really get that directly from people per se, but it's like something you have to pursue and, ask God for the answers. And so the way that this has been done throughout time here in North America is through the law of fasting, which is very, very foundational. I think it's really all over the world. As you know, Baha'u'llah renewed the law of fasting and made it accessible to everybody. It's a very lenient law. But the law of fasting throughout time here in North America, has been it's a very stringent, very demanding law where a person will go out into a wilderness area and fast, up to 4 days and 4 nights or maybe more without food or water. And so this was the advice that I got, was to do that. So that's what I started doing back in the early 70s and continued for many years. And I still do that. I still do that occasionally now. I really enjoy that practice.
Interesting. So how did you discover the Baha'i faith while you were on this spiritual search?
At some point after I started doing that, I did meet some Baha'is here. They were living here at Standing Rock, at a different community from where I'm at now, but close by. And they were the ones that really began to take me under their wing and share with me information about the Baha'i faith. And I was interested, and I would always enjoy hearing about it. And at the same time, I was doing this other pursuit, and kind of a long story, but just to summarize it, I didn't really feel like I was obtaining what I was seeking. And so then I asked my uncle, who was helping me with that, with the traditional style fasting. At one point, I said, "Well, I shared with him that I didn't feel like I was achieving the results that I wanted." Well, he said the reason why you're not getting what you want, he said, is because you're not focused. You're not focused. You're not. You have to really be more specific or more refined in your pursuit. Identify what it is that you want, and then ask God for that, and you'll receive that. And so then I thought, well, that's a really good advice. So then I specifically began to think about that, and then I realized what I really wanted to find was this path, this road of life. And in our local spiritual heritage, they speak of this. They call it the Chanku Luta. They call it the Red Road, and which is the path that God has put down for mankind to follow. And so this is what I specifically was asking for during this particular time when I was out fasting. Not too far from where I'm sitting right here, just several miles away. It's a butte. It's a hill, high hill, has kind of like a commanding situation here in the topography. And so that was really, really tough for me because it was very hot, and of course, no food and no water, 4 days and 4 nights. And when I completed that, I felt like I had really not achieved what I wanted at all. But my Baha'i friends, who I kept in touch with, shortly after that, they came over to my place and they informed me that they would be leaving the area, moving away from the area. And they asked me they told me that, well, Kevin, you've been investigating the Baha'i faith, and you know about the central figures, Baha'u'llah, and the Bab, of course, his forerunner, and you know about the covenant, how Abdul Baha is the center of the covenant, and the laws. And I said, yeah, you explained those to me. And they said, well, Kevin, you should actually become a Baha'i. And I said, well, yeah, I should. And how do you do that?
Did you know that was an option until that point?
Not really. No. And they said, well, I said, well, how do you do that? I mean, what do you mean? How do you do that? Well, in the U.S., they just have this, it's like an administrative procedure where you sign a declaration card. And then I said, well, if you sign a declaration card, what does that mean? Oh, they said, well, that just means that you identify yourself with the Baha'i community. And then I said, oh, you mean there's a community? They said, oh, yeah, there's Baha'is. They said, but they're just not here. They're just not here. But I think at that time, in the 70s, I think that maybe the closest Baha'i community was maybe Regina, Saskatchewan, or maybe Minneapolis or Denver. Those are all places that are 400 miles away. Denver's a little further. So yeah, there were no real, there's no Baha'i communities around the area. They said, oh yeah, there's communities, but they're all over, but they're just not here. And I said, yeah, well, I like that. But I said, there's one thing I'd like to also find out. I said, what about prayers? Do Baha'is have prayers? They said, oh yeah, we forgot to give you a prayer book. And then my friend fished around and he gave me he handed me a prayer book. So I grabbed hold of that prayer book, and then I opened it, just kind of arbitrarily opened it up, and I turned to the one of the prayers revealed by Abdul Baha from the tablets of the Divine Plan. The prayers I turned to is specifically the one for the Central States, which is this area where I live is categorized as one of the Central States. And so I turned to that prayer, and then I started reading it right there on the spot. And as I read it, it says, O Lord my God, praise and thanksgiving be unto thee, for thou hast guided me to the highway of the kingdom, suffered me to walk in the straight and far-stretching path. So when I read those words, of course, that's not the whole prayer. It's beautiful. It's a long prayer, and it talks about this journey that we set upon, this path, the spirit, straight and far-stretching path, highway of the kingdom. But then as I read that, I realized that's everything there was exactly what I had been asking, and suffered for in my pursuit. Yeah. So
it was like Abdul Baha wrote that tablet to you.
Yeah, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So what were some of the other spiritual teachings and principles of the Baha'i faith that you felt connected or that you resonated with?
The first thing that I really liked about it was the fast, because even before I was a Baha'i, when I'd see my Baha'i friends there, this family that I mentioned, I remember several times they would talk about the fast, and then I would ask them about that. And then I think for like a couple of years before actually becoming a Baha'i, I did participate in the fast. I would enjoy that. But but just to get back to your question, I like everything about it. I think one of the main things that I really enjoy about Baha'i faith is that it's all inclusive. It's all inclusive. I don't think I've got the quote exactly memorized, but in the Gleanings, Baha'u'llah says, "Unto the cities of all nations, he has sent his messengers," referring to God. "He has sent his messengers whom he hath commissioned to announce the glad tidings of the paradise of his good pleasure, to draw them nigh into the haven of abiding security, the seat of eternal holiness and transcendent glory." So I really like that. Of course, there's innumerable other passages that accentuate that theme and reiterate that theme, that really this whole process of divine revelation has always embraced and enveloped all segments of mankind throughout time, and that all peoples have received, divine bestowals in the form of, the social laws, spiritual laws, and then of course prophecies. All the peoples of the world are anticipating, a day of fulfillment.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I say.
So, to bring our listeners up to speed, so far we've learned about your life on the reservation in Standing Rock, the political and social conditions that prohibited you from observing your indigenous practices, and how a spiritual quest led you to becoming a Baha'i in the late 70s. So, you're a Lakota man, a Baha'i, and you're also an indigenous hoop dancer who's traveled the world sharing your gift and your teachings. Could you share a bit about what hoop dancing is for those of us who may not be aware?
Well, first of all, just between you and me, I don't consider myself really anything in particular. Especially, I just look at myself as a world citizen, But basically, about the time that I became a Baha'i, that's when I was kind of gifted, or somehow was blessed with this hoop dance, and it is a traditional practice. It's a choreographed prayer, and I recently was visiting with an elder, very well-known elder here, and in his day, in his youth, he was a very well-known hoop dancer. So then I asked him. I asked him, where did you get this dance from? Where is this dance from? And then he just said, well, he says, this dance comes from out in the universe. It comes from the same place where we all come from, the world of light, or the world of truth or reality, the place we all come from. And then he told me specifically that I was really blessed because I get to do a lot of presentations for children. So then he said that these children recall their origin. They that they come from that world. They haven't forgotten that, and they live in that world. He said, so that's good. You can reinforce them and promote them, and that to keep that light, that reality alive within themselves. But he says many adults have forgotten this and are unaware. But he said through this dance, you can even wake them up, and bring them back into the world of reality, the world of light. So that's what it is. It's not a. I think I just say the dominant culture, immigrant culture, whatever. I think they use this what do they call it? It's a view that of a false dichotomy, and that is like the arts are usually put in the category of entertainment, whereas I think from an indigenous perspective, it's totally not that at all. Is that if you use the arts as entertainment, then you use it as an escape. Like you lead a stressful life, or let's just say hypothetically, we lead a stressful life and so much pressure. So we want to escape from that. So then we use the arts, like music or whatever, to escape that our reality, everyday reality. But I think for indigenous cultures, we use the arts for the exact opposite. We use them to connect to reality, to connect with that which is real, which is good, which is holy, which is beautiful, which has continuity and has permanence. In the world of spirit, we use the arts to connect with that.
Wow, I'm so inspired. I wish the rest of the world could learn from these teachings and this perspective. Could you walk us through what your school presentations look like?
Well, what I do is I always start with some kind of a song to show my respect, to acknowledge all of them as, since those are my hosts. I don't live down there in Rapid City, but those kids do. So then that's really a good formality to observe, is to show respect, courtesy, and acknowledgement to your host. And so I did that. And like yesterday, what I did was I did this song. They always call it the flag song or the national anthem, the Lakota national anthem, which I mentioned to the kids yesterday. That was a song that was composed by a gentleman named Ellis Chips over there in Rapid City back in the early 50s, I think it was. And I mentioned that he was such a genius composer when he made that song, because the song says, Tunkashi Laiapi Tawapaha. And so a lot of people think that means the U.S. flag, and I think they could be right. But see, this you heard that word in there, tunkashila. Tunkashila api means the one that they turn to, that they have for a grandfather, which it can mean grandfather, or but it also can mean, to me, it means Baha'u'llah. I already mentioned that to you before. And then tawapaha means his emblem, his standard. His standard. It says, tunkashila api tawapaha. It will stand forever. It will stand throughout time, and it will always endure. And then it says, and beneath it, all the nations shall flourish and grow, shall develop and prosper. And at the end it says, He'echa, wana lechamo. And so at the end, this really refers to the fact that it says that, and so therefore, because of this, I myself, I shall arise and I shall serve.
Wow, it sounds incredibly powerful. So what happens next?
So, yeah, then I just play a little bit of the melody on the flute, then I sing it for them. Yesterday I did an eagle song for them. That's their at that little school there in Rapid City. That's their school emblem is the eagle. So then I did an eagle song, and I just shared with them the fact that the eagle feather, throughout North America, the eagle is really a ubiquitous symbol. As long as people have lived on this continent, the eagle has been the most important symbol of the people, and so that the eagle represents the ascendant nature of the human spirit, and so then the feathers represent virtues, and so for the eagle itself, the feather is instrumentality that enables the wings to have lift and to propel the eagle skyward. And that for you and I as eagles, eagles being, in a sense, representational or symbolic of the ascendant nature of the human spirit, that we're all born, we come into this world with a full set of feathers. We all have all the virtues. And then yesterday I had them, start to name virtues. And pretty soon when they found out that they can actually name hundreds of virtues, everybody. But anyway, so we're all coming to this world, all these virtues. But then I said, the only thing that will enable those feathers or those virtues to become activated is when we use them in service. We use them in service to our, our families, our communities, and so forth. And then once we do that, then there's no limit to how high we can soar on these, wings of knowledge and understanding and love. And so that,
that's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, so then I just, dedicated the song to them like that. And so, that's basically what I do. So in other words, even though it might outwardly seem that I'm doing a cultural program, I'm very careful to I don't really say it to the kids, but I'm very careful to realize that, these are traditional arts or folk arts, and every culture has them, like there's Persians or Arabs or Chinese. It doesn't matter. What folk arts are, they're simply expressions that come down through the generations, and over time they're perfected, or they reach a stage where they become very representational of universal human traits. Like we all have this love and attraction towards beauty, towards harmony, balance, symmetry. But what's really cool about folk art is that no matter where you go on the planet, they have validity. So people appreciate it because they say, it really appeals to people because they say, yes, this really appeals because these are things that really give validity to who we are as human beings.
They're kind of like universal truths.
Yeah. Universal. So that's what I like to do, is just transcend, the tribal specific or cultural specific themes and just hit on universal themes.
So you've traveled the world sharing your art and your spiritual beliefs, dance, flute, storytelling. What motivates you to continue this practice?
Oh, it's just there's still a lot of interest in it, and I feel good. I feel active, and let's see now. So I've got quite a few things going on. Mostly, I do things in the schools around here because it's just a path of life that kind of chose me. But I always say, that's my motto: just hoop till you droop. Just keep on going. Yeah. Yeah.
That should be the title of this podcast.
Yeah, hoop till you droop. Exactly. Yeah.
So I know you have a lot of projects on the go. I recently found a GoFundMe campaign that you'd put together to help continue your trips in going into these schools. Could you share a bit more about that, and also any other projects that you have on the horizon?
Well, it's just the fact that the reason why is that in the current socio-political economic climate in the United States, that there's a lack of attention to people out this way, in the more the rural or non-urban setting, and so there's a cutback, and especially in the arts out in this area. So then I just thought, well, maybe I can get a little bit of help from the outside to continue what I'm doing. So it's really good. I really, really appreciate all the support. It's fantastic.
How do people find you?
They can go to my website, kevinlocke.com. I've got links there and promo materials and scheduling information. And that would be fantastic.
And your book that just came out as well. Could you share a little bit about what inspired these memoirs? Yeah, well, this was something that was, somebody approached me through the Bahai Publishing Trust here in the United States about doing some memoirs. And so I collaborated with a couple of ladies who are really fantastic because, I guess, I just see things from my own limited perspective, but they were able to, ask questions and, draw out different points that I don't know if I would have really come up with those on my own. I know I wouldn't have. So I was very thankful for that collaboration. But it simply elaborates on the different themes that you yourself have mentioned in this interview, and so it just develops all these various themes. About how I became a Baha'i, how I got onto these different traditions, and all these things about this walking this path of life so far. You can get it through the Bahai Publishing Trust or through Amazon or anything that's called Arising, ARISING. Yes, thank you for sharing that. And we will be sure to also include links to the book and your website on the web content that's associated with this podcast episode. I sadly have to bring this interview to a close, Kevin, but I really want to thank you for your time today and your contributions to this episode of Cloud9. I personally have learned a lot about your experiences as an Indigenous person and your unique spiritual journey to the faith and the context behind your creative and artistic practices. And I also want to thank you for the artistic contributions and services that you've rendered for the community. Okay, thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks so much for listening to Cloud9. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to check out BahaiTeachings.org, where you can find more Baha'i-inspired podcasts, videos, and articles.